I feel like we don't talk enough about how well Konami has been doing with card design. I'm more optimistic than most, but every format since Crossover Breaker has been good except for 2-month Alliance Inside format, and that has never been more true than right now. What makes a format good is obviously subjective. It's how good someone thinks the gameplay of a format is, but I know many people share similar views to mine. The current meta is fantastic right now. To explain, I have to go over what I didn't like about older metas. There were several main problems I had with previous formats. All of them are quite related, but have different effects on gameplay that I didn't like. The first is extremely powerful one-card starter combos. Examples would be Yubel, or Snake Eyes, or Memento, and Tenpai honestly. The main problem is that there wasn't a better strategy than Floodgates, blowout hand traps, or a very large amount of normal hand traps, which makes gameplay very much a yes-no question on the first action as opposed to different boards, which meant a lot of games felt the same. You would test for extenders and accept that you were FTK'd if they had them. The second is that normal hand traps often had no impact because they are too easy to repair with an identical combo extender. For example, take any Memento starter. If you get Impermed on it, then a quick play repairs the combo to be an identical board, or like Tenpai, Imperm Hydra, and then they just activate Kaiman or Summoning or Tundra. And that's why I loved Ryzeal, because Ryzeal was one of the first strong decks in many months where strategic hand trap held for duo drive had a noticeable impact on the end board, and you didn't make an identical full board with one extender. The third is that engines were too small. That's not to say that decks at the moment all have massive engines, but it is disturbing when it almost seemed like a mandatory requirement for a deck to have space for 18 non-engine. It's more that decks can play more engine now if they want to, because one, normal hand traps are not extremely impactful against top meta decks at the moment, and two is that most top decks have extremely good lingering floodgate compromises because they can play on their opponent's turn, and the third is that final end boards for the most popular decks became smaller. There are some combo decks with massive boards still in the format, but essentially Konami had found a way to design cards in such a way that more card activity just ended up outclassing raw power in terms of winning consistently. So even though there are still combo decks, they end up being not as popular unless you really love combo decks or the archetype. Honestly, I can't believe they did it so effectively. I thought that there was no way to do it and we would just be locked in one card combo format forever. A consequence of this high activity is that it leads to new gameplay patterns that I would say are pretty much never seen in older metas. It is probably not well liked because it relates to Charmies and Maxies, but because decks are so actionable on your turn, it is actually a good idea to just Charmy on your turn in a lot of situations. It obviously depends on matchup and circumstance, but I'll give a couple of examples. Duelist Advance released, I had a K9 player win dice roll and then do first action Fool Loss. I wasn't paying that much attention because it was just a local, so I asked if he sent me first for some reason, but no, he just started his turn with Fool Loss. For a deck like Pure K9, it actually makes sense to do this. K9 has no way to convert the Fool Loss dead in their hand, so you might as well activate it and draw if your opponent has Izna or Femena or Holy Sue, and they were going to trigger the Izna anyways because their engine activates in the hand, as opposed to a deck such as Yummy, where if they didn't activate the Fool Loss on their turn, they weren't going to trigger Izna in the first place. Here's another example. I was playing Yummy yesterday, so I had 2 Fuas against Striker, and on Ray Effect, it's obvious they were going to summon 0. So I could drop both my Fuas and draw 2, but considering the Striker compromise under Fua is actually good, it was better to split up my 2 Fuas because it threatens the 0 summon, the Ray Effect, the Lemnis Gate, and the linkage for my turn. It applies more with Maxi than Charmies of course, because you would draw 3 off of Izna as opposed to 1 off Izna, but specific Charmies against certain decks will be similar. There are just so many decks that are summoning 4 or more times on your turn right now. Another great thing about the format is that a lot of the older annoying cards such as Appaloosa or Floodgates are much less common. Most decks can't make Appaloosa, and Pankratops being in every deck makes those cards lose power. If you can play Tikaboo, you would still play Tikaboo, and some people choose Anti-Spell, but in general, most people are on some sort of Solemns where they're going first card of choice, which is just much less annoying. My explanation is a little bit messy this time because it's just based on how I feel, but I believe the best part about the format is that because decks are more engine heavy than before, and because most decks play so differently from each other, it feels like each game is very different, and that's something I feel like hasn't been present in a format really since AGOV. The format has what I like to describe as true diversity. For example, if you ask me, I will say Ryzeal Malice format was more diverse than Snake Eyes format. Snake Eyes format had more top decks such as Snake Eyes, or Yubel, or Tenpai, or Memento. But all of them have the same type of gameplay feeling, and you got one shot by all of them, and it just had different pictures on their cards. Ryzeal Malice may have had less decks that were considered top meta decks, but the viable decks at least all play very differently. Currently, in my opinion, Duelist Advanced format has over a dozen playable decks. The 4 you see on screen right now are what most people consider to be the best decks of the format. and I also share this opinion, hence why I have made 4 videos on these individual decks. But that's not to say other decks are unplayable. I would say a lot of the rogue decks right now actually have a matchup that is completely fine into some of these decks, but the reason they're rogue is because they have a very mad matchup into one of these, or they're just outclassed in a certain aspect, whether that's consistency or playing into the popular non-engine. For example, I think that Memento is not at all incompetent into the Justice Hunter decks engine to engine, but it is extremely bad into Malice as well as the non-engine of the format. Striker is a more playable deck, and it matches up fine against most of these decks, but executes its game plan a bit less consistently and is also kind of taking collateral damage from Vanquish Soul. Crystron K9 is arguably as good as these, but it's just worse into blowout hand traps and going second compared to Vanquish Soul. So the gameplay of the format will primarily be how these 4 decks match up against each other. Some of these also have many hybrid builds that I'll talk about. To make it short, pretty much all these decks can beat each other. The worst in my opinion is Dragontail against Vanquish Soul. Most people will probably agree that matchup is quite difficult, but the other ones all match up fine into each other and are pretty close to even, or at least close enough to the point where pilot skill will be the difference consistently. I have my own opinions about some of them. For example, I actually thought Justice Hunter format was a bit of a triangle format. I think Malice is marginally unfavored against Yummy, and Yummy is slightly unfavored against Dragontail, and Malice is favored against Dragontail, but not even all players agree with me, which is the beauty of the format. People can't even agree on what decks beat each other. And that's kind of why I thought Last Road of the King post looks the way it does, with Vanquish Soul first, Yummy close second, and then Malice and Dragontail afterwards. If Vanquish Soul has a very favored matchup against Dragontail, then there's going to be less Dragontail and Malice while Yummy gets better. Before Duelist Advance, Malice, Yummy, and Dragontail were pretty much the same representation every single week. To be honest, by far the most annoying matchup for all of these decks, in my opinion, is playing into themselves. In general, I think combo decks are not very good at playing into themselves. I'm trying to think if there's an exception, but I can't think of one right now. So Malice and Yummy were never extremely good at playing into themselves, and then Dragontail was a completely fine mirror match, and it is honestly still not terrible. It's one of the better mirror matches of the format still, but they made this matchup worse for fun with the Floodgate monster. I do think it is a bit overrated. There are actually a lot of ways to clear it. Your hybrid engine, such as K9 or Magistus, should clear the Floodgate with the Psychic Blaster or that Fiend that equips. Or you could just fuse Murudu or Green Dragon to play. So the format is incredibly diverse, and the driving forces of the format all play very differently from each other. You can say Yummy and Malice are both combo decks, but they really don't feel that similar. Malice is much more of a deck that crushes you to death with their board, while Yummy, although it has a very strong board itself, is significantly more breakable, especially with non-engine, but it is a hyper-consistent deck and has much better compromises than Malice due to so much of the deck's power being attached to the Link 1. Plus they have a very different matchup spread because their boards don't share a single interruption. And then Dragontail and Vanquish Soul obviously play nothing like these two decks. Another great thing about these being the main decks is that the Justice Hunter decks are very easy to pick up and understand what you should be doing on your turn 1. So there's a low barrier to entry in terms of learning how to play them. But because they do a lot of things on your opponent's turn, there's a lot of skill expression in how you choose to execute your board, which I think is pretty much the ideal deck design. In short, the format is highly diverse, and the diversity of the format has been very fun and refreshing gameplay, without as many blowouts as before. It's just a format where I'm not sure what the best deck is, and I don't think it really matters too much because I think you could play multiple different decks and top if your matchup understanding is strong enough, and especially none of these core meta decks would be a bad choice for a tournament. I personally play Vanquish Soul because it has my favorite gameplay of the 4, the most, but if I played any of the others, I would not say my deck is holding me back from winning a larger tournament. And most importantly, the gameplay between the decks is actually fun and vastly different. Now I'm going to go into specifics about the decks. It's just going to be a short summary. If I spent 10 minutes on every single deck going in depth, then we would have a 3-hour video. So I'll start by updating the driving forces. I have videos on all 4 of these on my channel already, but there are a lot of hybrid builds right now, so I'll briefly try to summarize them. I'll talk about Dragontail first because it has the most builds. Just off the top of my head, there's a Magistus, K9, Fiendsmith, Regenesis, Primite, and King of the Swamp builds. If you haven't played against Dragontail yet, it may seem annoying to not know exactly what deck you're playing against at first, but it doesn't really matter because you can kind of compartmentalize these hybrids based on what they do. I would say Magistus, K9, and Fiendsmith all kind of have the same major purpose in my opinion. You play them because you can build a negate early, which means you can stop insane blowouts, namely Retaliating Z, at the expense of losing more to Maxi and Fua. I would say of the 3, this is just my opinion, but I think K9 is the best and Fiendsmith is the worst for this purpose. This is mainly due to the number of draws you can use to make this, as well as how they play into Fua. K9 plays by far the best in the Fua, and Fiendsmith plays the worst. Because if you think about it like this, K9 one draw into Fua is already Ripper, and it's not unreasonable to give them one extra draw and just make the board, or you can even choose to just search follow-up with your K9s and then fuse without making the Ripper to only give them one draw total. While Magistus can make board load into mini Varudras, they have less extenders than K9, so even though they have access to their Magistus cards by bridging with Rahu Dragontail, that triggers the Retaliating Sea, which defeats one of the primary benefits of the hybrid engine in my opinion. I think K9 is the best Dragontail build at the moment just in terms of what is positioned the best in the meta, but Magistus is my favorite to play because it's the most fun. Both are great builds though. My problem with Fiendsmith is that it's short on starters, so you're not really going to draw them. Fiendsmith has the benefit of being able to go into it, but that doesn't really help with Retaliating Sea because you had to fuse to even establish 2 monsters in the first place. If it's still somehow completely unhit, I think this build could be good in the TCG. Caesar kill Retaliating Sea is going to be very good, but we're just missing too much of the Fiendsmith engine here in the OCG. Next is Primite. I wish I could say that I am someone who can play any deck as long as it is strong, but I just don't think 100% with logic. How a deck feels is very important to me, and I don't like this deck, so be aware that I am biased against almost all Primite builds. I think Primite is a cool engine and it's good for the game, but the package is 6 additional normal summons and 1 normal monster brick if your deck wasn't already going to play it for 1 payoff. So almost all Primite decks are built in a way where I don't like how they feel. Dragontail is already a deck with 6 very important normal summons, so the barrel will trade off with these. Murudu is the way you play around Imperm, and Ruxius is your value and consistency normal summon. It just feels very bad. It's a popular build, but I don't like it. Primite can protect against Retaliating Sea, but you have to hard open 5 mana or be able to normal Ruxius in order to search 5 mana. But that implies that you open Dark Magician, so it rarely makes Dragoon without activating a spell card. And I guess lastly is something more pure, like a full non-engine or King of the Swamp build. I think King of the Swamp is basically outdated at this point, and the non-engine build has an almost unwinnable matchup in the Vanquish Soul. It's also the worst against Retaliating and the targeted hate. That's just my opinion, so of all the hybrids right now, the one that feels the best to me is the K9 deck, for the meta, the current meta at least. But I do also think the Magistus deck is very strong. Next is Yummy. I would say the hybrids are Primite, Striker, Pure, and Fiendsmith. And then there's also Purely Yummy, but that's more of a Purely deck than a Yummy deck, and honestly it's more like artwork synergy than actually being good together. I'll start by addressing Striker. I think that build is still playable, but fell off mainly for reasons I didn't understand before. The first issue is that you don't really want to play just Engage and Hornet Drones because it's 4 copies of the same card, and you don't want to play 1 Hornet Drones or you never draw it. So obviously you want to play a utility card, and Widow Anchor is the best one because unlike something such as Afterburners, it's actionable when you go first. The issue is that Imperm is already not strong right now, so if Imperm is not strong, then you definitely don't want to play Widow Anchor. And then the Striker package just ends up being clunky. There are instances where Widow Anchor is better than Imperm. For example, if you want to play and then use it to stop something such as the Yummy Link 1, then it's actionable there where Imperm is not. I've seen 1 drones, I've seen 1-to-2 ratio on drones and Engage, but it typically doesn't get played at a bigger ratio than that anymore. The second issue is that the extra deck, which was formerly pretty perfect at 15, is actually quite tight now. With the new Link 2 and Starham, and some players also choosing to play the Mikan Echo, this level 3 Formula Synchron to double arc like them, then fitting Kagari ends up having big opportunity cost. You also need a way to kill towers such as Goddess or Mosquito. And also with K9's increasing popularity, Droll is completely back in the meta where it was useless before, and that's another issue with Engage. By the way, I've seen a little bit of confusion around Starham. I think Road of the King explained it a little bit confusing last week. It's a beast, so you can summon it when you Obedient Schooled, but it's not a synchro climbing tool. It's that the Yummies you summon from Starham get their synchro effect, and then you can link it off into the Link 1, so it helps in some weird grind games. Pure Yummy is fine, it's always been fine, and the deck feels pretty good. I would say there are 13 1-card starters, which is on the edge of being consistent, so some players also opt to play maps as well to get over 90%. And then Primite's the newest one. Road of the King explains Primite quite well. I don't have much to add. I think it weirdly makes more sense than Dragontail build because Yummy doesn't need its normal summon to be their main engine, so you can play the Primite package without sacrificing your engine to non-engine ratio, but I also would just rather play Pure because I just don't like playing the Primite engine. Malice and Vanquish Soul I have not much updates for. They're pretty much the same as when I made my deck overviews. Malice, I feel like, is a little bit disrespected at the moment. Like a lot of OCG meta breakdowns I see on YouTube, I see say Malice is the 4th best deck, or they'll say pretty much the order the decks are represented in Road to the King is the order of the deck strength. Malice could be the 4th best deck right now. I don't know for certain, but I don't see it as noticeably worse than these other 3, especially because Malice becomes incredibly powerful the less it's prepped for. So when you consider that all of the top meta decks need different answers, that means you never really have space for Nyalis, so you basically only have Lancia and potentially Fua to cover Malice. Some topping lists recently don't even side Lancia. It's just complete disrespect. Malice is also one of the best decks into the K9 engine, and also one of the best decks against Vanquish Soul. Malice can try to set up Appaloosa before triggering Izna if they play into Ash Blossom, and because it is an impulse deck, it has more ways to stop the Holy Suit double pop line, encouraging them to go for a steal, which is often not enough. Impulse has problems as well because a lot of the best tech cards this format are Earth, and Droll is a wind, so Impulse conflicts with a lot of good non-engine, but it is still a card that is good against every single deck. I tested Malice tonight, and there were 2 Vanquish Soul matches where I won both with low difficulty. It's really bad for Vanquish Soul that they reveal their entire hand to you when they try to interrupt your turn 1. Somehow, the non-engine in Vanquish Soul keeps going lower, and it's already so low. I don't really agree with that necessarily. You can add Case and then more K9s, but you can't fit that many rank 5s, so they end up just being consistency cards for something that you can already bridge into. We're reaching the point where some people are only playing Shifter, Maxi, and Ash Blossom for non-engine, which is 6 cards, and that's just going to be a big problem when you play against combo. Now, I'm going to talk about some rogue decks. The reason I think rogue decks are strong right now is because they can beat the meta decks without high difficulty, assuming the pilot understands the matchup. So I'll start with decks that haven't been released to the TCG yet. The first one is Striker. This is the first time I think Striker has been remotely competitive since it got released. Sky Striker is a deck that is probably not as strong as the top meta decks. It struggles with Vanquish Soul in particular, but since it always had an engine that was strong going second, it produces a hand that can break boards very often. Let's take the best board in the format, for example. I would probably say that's a Malice board. Actually, the best board is the Morganite board, but the Malice board is the best one in terms of what is consistently being made by decks. It is very reasonable for Striker to break the Malice end board if they draw a strong enough hand. If you hit 3 spells while having 4 or more cards in hand, it becomes very challenging for the Malice player to have enough interrupts without non-engines such as Ash or Impulse, or Droll and Lockbird of course, but that will just one-shot you regardless of deck. And you don't really want to summon Whitebinder to banish 2 of their spells for fun, when the spells are like Upstart Goblin or Reinforcement of the Army, especially when GWC Whitebinder is the strongest interrupt of the deck, and the deck has 3 Widow Anchors to stop that. The ceiling of Striker is extremely high right now. I think it's better if I go over the 3 new cards first. I actually don't have any of them, so I'll try to put up images instead. The first one is Amatsu. This card is, in my opinion, reads amazing, but is very disappointing in practice. I thought this card would be a lot better than it is because it almost sounds like Phantom Wave Bell, but the 2000 attack point limitation is just far too restricting, and every single good deck can basically ignore the Amatsu at the moment. Maybe in a future meta it will be very good, but right now it is not very good. The second card is Zero, and this card is obviously very good. It searches Engage, but I will say the effect to summon Ray and Rose getting stopped is extremely devastating. I lose almost every time that happens, so it is very, very scary to play the second effect into Ash Blossom, or Impulse, or Called By, for example. The third card is the real surprise for me, Lemnis Gate. I think this card is very powerful. At first, I'm pretty sure many people thought the same things as me, that Zero was the God support card and that Lemnis Gate was just a playable card, but it has insane utility. It's always in the graveyard because you can just Shizuku and put it in your graveyard. It lets you dodge Called By, which is completely devastating because Called By on Zero and Ray is very painful for the deck, and it's also an insane game finisher. The way Striker is built now, it is not at all difficult to shuffle 6, and even more surprising is that you can shuffle more than 6. I've shuffled 12 before. And if you're shuffling 6 with Lemnis Gate, then it pretty much breaks every board in the format. Non-targeting bounce is just way too strong. The effect to Link in Graveyard is also very important because it lets you have more interrupts on their turn while searching follow-up. For example, if you resolve Zero effect to summon Ray and Rose, you can Ray into Kagari and then Lemnis Gate into Azalea, or if you have Rose in hand, you can make Azalea Temperance. Another weird strength of Striker is that it kind of has a Tenpai-like effect where you don't know what they choose to go post-board. Game 1, they'll choose to go first, but game 2 and 3, they might choose second, and that makes it really awkward to side. Like I had a game I lost because my hand was Pankratops and Evenly, and they sent me first. But you can't just side going first cards because then they'll catch you with the Solemns. So Striker is honestly quite powerful at the moment, but it does kind of lose to the same things as before. Droll is very bad. I will say Droll is good against a lot of decks right now, but it is the best against Striker. Evenly is going to be very bad. And we also have some crazy people still siding anti-spells, but Striker is absolutely very strong, and I personally think it could top big events. So the second one is Moonlight. This is by far the deck I know the least about. I played against it a few times, just raw power-wise, what it actually does is pretty ridiculous. This deck makes 2 unaffected towers, and both of them Raigeki your opponent because they're soft once per turn, and they also have a spell trap negate. And the deck kills you with relative ease when it goes second. How it plays into hand traps or what its matchups are, I honestly don't have a very good idea, but it seems strong enough. The way it plays, I would kind of describe it as Fusion Memento, or I guess Memento is a fusion deck, but what I meant is that you can just foolish to search names, go through until you have 4, but instead of summoning the 5k, you make a towers, and the continuous spell card turns Polymerization into Miracle Fusion, which lets you make a second towers. If this deck were secretly top tier, I wouldn't be surprised, and if it's too inconsistent or bad at playing into interruption, then I wouldn't know. But it's also one of the only Impulse decks, and obviously Impulse is OP. Pure K9 is a deck that I think is outclassed by other K9 builds, but is definitely still playable. It still tops, and it's not at all a deck you can disrespect because it's very easy to lose to the end board without any non-engine. Nash or C104 are very good monsters, and Ripper is also a very good monster. It falls off a bit now that Droll is back as well though. And then K9 Crystron is a combo deck, and I did think it was better than Pure K9 before Vanquish Soul was released. K9 just pairs really well with combo decks that already play level 5s because it makes hand trap protection really early and giving your level 5s more utility. The level 5s are only locked from light exceeds, which means you can use them to make your level 7 synchros in certain combos, which is very convenient, and because of Riverstormer, they bridge into each other using Scrap Recycler. I would say Crystrons have better synergy with K9 than Vanquish Soul because Vanquish Soul can't bridge into Vanquish Soul with K9. I respect this deck a lot. I didn't do any math for decks outside of the top 4, so I don't know how consistent it is exactly, but this deck feels very consistent to me. It's not a 1-card starter deck, but it has very non-specific 2-card combos, so it feels quite good to play, honestly. It feels more consistent to me than Vanquish Soul because there are a lot of Vanquish Soul cards that don't do anything, like Jiaolong unless you have 6/6A and Holy Su, or Borger and Caesar without a normal summon. In my opinion, Crystron is probably the most consistent deck of the format and making a massive amount of negates. In a previous video, I discussed Whitewood's making a ton of Omni negates, but it honestly struggles to access those Omni negates in a lot of games. This deck makes 6 of these interrupts pretty much every game with low difficulty. Ripper, Nash, Izuna, which can make the Chronomaly on their turn, FA Dawn Dragster, Cyber Dragon Infinity, SP, the level 9 Synchro Monster, which banishes 3 cards on your opponent's field or graveyard, their Trap card, which pops 2 face-up cards. Dark Ruler will help, but no one is playing that because it's not really good against the rest of the meta, so it's better to just play other generic cards. It has problems, of course. Droll, Lancia, and Shifter are very good against Crystron, so that's something to consider. People say Crystron is good against Lancia because you can just play with your K9s instead, but that's kind of like saying Malice is good against Lancia because they just play with their ad-inningsters instead. Sometimes you just don't draw those cards, and I would say this deck's fall-off is mainly because people think Vanquish Soul is better. It has much better blowout compromises, it's the far better deck at going second, it is highly resilient to blowouts such as Tikaboo and Shifter, and can even play those cards themselves. But Crystron is very dangerous. It's one of my least favorite decks to play against in the format, and was something I was seriously considering before Duelist Advance. The next deck is Onomat Ryzeal. This is a very popular deck at the moment. The way I would describe this deck is that it is a full combo deck. It really does not play like Ryzeal at all. The build with the max Goblinbergs and the double Ouroboros to rip 4 cards out of your hand turn 1, that build I don't think is that good. It does that combo extremely easily, but it's more of a targeted counter. Like the amount of times I pulled off the hand rip combo were against Vanquish Soul, which isn't necessarily the main decking the tools to stop a Go First FDK deck. The build with a much smaller Onomat package and only 1 Ouroboros, and the extra deck to fit utilities such as Exciton and Tornado Dragon, that one is basically just Ryzeal, so I think that one is a bit better. It has more going second tools, but I think it's just worse than Ryzeal, and even worse is that because Ryzeal's so hit, it's not easy to bridge into your Ryzeals into a board. So I think it ends up just being a worse deck than Ryzeal was, which was not necessarily going to be one of the best decks in Justice Hunter format anyways. So I'm going to go over a couple of older decks now. The first one is Memento. So Memento does not match up terrible against the top decks that aren't Malice. For example, if you look at Yummy, it has flips and pops and surprise bounces. These are not the best interrupts to have against Memento. Targeting pops and flips actually might be the worst interrupts into Memento, and they definitely don't win going second. So for the Yummy player, they basically have no choice but to make Arclight during their turn 1 every single time. It's not even about having Negate, It's that you need the Arclight to floodgate their Goblin, their Horse, and their Sleepy Dump, and also fusing from hand. But if they must make the Arclight, then they have no choice but to play in a Nib, and also just having any breakers such as Pankratops or Raigeki is clearing the Arclight, and then they're playing engine to engine where it's not good. Now, they could be on the Mikaneko build where they make 2 Arclights, and in that case, you will probably lose, but if you lose coin flips to those players, then it is what it is. Dragontail also does not feel bad at all. The issue with Memento is that it lines up horrible with the non-engine right now. Bell is popular for the first time in forever, and that means they can just trade with your Memento fusion, and Retaliating Sea is obviously a massive problem as well, and everyone is citing that for Dragontail. K9 is everywhere, and Ripper Negate is also quite annoying. It's just not the best time to be playing Memento, even though engine to engine is actually fine. I tried to fix this. I tested K9 Memento for a bit, and to be honest, it felt pretty good. It insulates against Retaliating Sea. It doesn't cost any meaningful deck space since Izunas are hand traps, and Jokul doesn't clog your horse because it just brings it out. But then I thought about it, and it's like, why am I playing K9 Memento when I could just be playing Vanquish Soul instead? The popularity of the deck was always low though, so I think it's even less represented than it could be. I was pretty much the last Memento player in my city, so if I'm not playing it, then there's not really going to be any Memento players. Whitewoods is another combo deck. I never really liked this deck because it just seemed like an outclassed combo deck to me. It plays poorly into Droll while something such as Memento doesn't, and it's actually the worst combo deck in the Droll because Malice and Memento ignore it while the K9 combo decks just play with Ripper and Izuna. It bricks more because it has random engine requirements that are only there for the combo, such as Curse of Diabel. I know it sounds like a lot, but there are only 8 spells and traps you actually want to send for your Whitewoods effects. 3 of those are the field spell, which lock you out of your Azamina cards. So a lot of games, you don't have a good send, and then it becomes very expensive to play. Its nib protection also comes later than other combo decks unless you open Azamina access. By the time you've gone through Selene Apo, if you started with the field spell, you've most likely also gone through the Rhoda, the Quick Play, Rushiela, Diabel, and Elzat Azamina Search Wanted. So you'll probably still win because you'll have the Sin Adjudicator set up at that point, but it's just something other combo decks don't have to deal with. It's not an excellent deck going second because its engine is just there to access your extra deck, and also the 1 to 2 card starter combo isn't even as strong as the other combo decks. The ceiling of Whitewoods is pretty much the highest, but you basically need 3 engine cards in order to access all of the interrupts. You won't make Barone, the Azamina cards, or access Woes unless you open other engine, for example. But if you manage to send Wanted and the Sin Adjudicator to make the Saint Azamina, then you'll win every time. I'm not trying to make it seem like it's a horrible deck. It has charming lines, but most decks do at this point. It's still one of the strongest decks going first when it can play, and it is very popular, so you will see it in a tournament. I just never thought this deck was better than other combo decks in the format. And then the last deck is Orcust. Orcust is a deck where I feel like it is something you think is an insane deck when you play against it, but then when you play as Orcust, it feels very bad. This is just my opinion, but the deck is not excellent consistency-wise. If you just count the 1-card starters, there's Girsu and Harpor, and then 2 goods, and then the real Foolish Burial, and also Prosperity. And obviously there's 2-card combos you can use, such as normal summoning Symbol Skeletons, and then sending another Orcust, such as Nightmare. And you can send the Brick Orcust with your breakers, such as Super Poly and Droplet as well. I don't know if we have to go back to some toss format logic and play Armageddon Knight, Mathematician, Scrap Recycler or something, but you really don't want to do that because you add normal summons to a deck with normal summons already, and then these normal summons don't make the link 1 and are highly interruptible, so they're horrible in the hand traps as opposed to normaling an Orcust monster. But the problem with Orcust, the main problem with Orcust, is that there's kind of just no reason to play it unless you like Orcust. That's always the greatest sin a deck can have. It's not being weak or bad, it's being outclassed, and there's not really an advantage Orcust has over Malice, for example. It plays worse in everything since it loses to both Lancia and Shifter. It doesn't have good Charming compromises, but when it plays, the actual deck is strong. It's one of the few impulse decks, and the board is smaller than Crystron, Whitewoods, Memento, and Malice, but the board is still pretty much unpassable. There's also no Bestials right now, so that's another thing that helps Orcust a lot. You can easily lose to Orcust if you play any of the top decks. And then I think that is pretty much everything relevant. Some people might be curious about the new lore deck. People will play the lore deck. As it is right now, it is rubbish. And then Blue Eyes is another one. I think that Blue Eyes is a bit power crept at the moment. I always kind of had a low opinion of Blue Eyes. You can still test it out. It's obviously not incapable of winning. It's just not strong, and I think it aged worse than all the other old decks. The last deck that might be relevant is Stun. I don't want to talk too much about it because no one ever believes me, but I understand the logic on why Stun is bad. Except there's a devoted group of Stun players where I live who play nothing but Stun or Woman decks, and if they go first, early Morganite, draw the Christia or Vanity's Ruler, then you will lose no matter what you do. It's not even like the deck is guaranteed to lose going second when they have breakers and cards such as Equation Cannon, And unlike Lab, they play the full Equation Cannon package levels 1 through 7 for Fusion, so the range gets extended too, even if you're a deck that usually cannot get hit by Equation Cannon. So lastly, I just want to say, I will most likely be taking a break from the game for a while, despite the fact that the format is so excellent, mainly because I will not be attending a WCQ this season. Every day they let out a couple spots at 1 p.m., but I failed again today, and most of my testing group is in, but there's still 4 of us that aren't, and I can try again tomorrow, and I'm still going to be going in person to see if enough people drop out and I can register, but my hopes are low because my friends are also going in person, and I'm sure there are others as well. I know Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game, and it's primarily played for fun, but for me personally, I lose a lot of enjoyment when I feel like I don't have a goal, and it's not even about making it to Worlds this year. I'm not delusional about this. I know I'm not ready to go to Worlds yet. I have gameplay posted on the channel, and then you can watch me play until I haven't reached top level play yet. If the stars align and I drew perfect every single game, Max C glued to my hand, and I somehow lucked my way into Worlds, I would just not be a good representative for my country. But I really wanted to start competing at the bigger events because it's really the only way I can tell how much more I have to learn. How close am I to reaching top competitive level? Online is one thing, but playing online with flashing indicators telling me which triggers I have is just not the same. And as it is right now, I don't see how it's possible for me to ever qualify for Worlds from my country unless there's an infrastructure change. I'm not saying it's easy to go to Worlds in other countries, but in North America, for example, you weren't denied the chance to compete because if you had the financials, you could attend more larger events, as opposed to my country with very few large events, an extremely large player base, and thus incredibly competitive registration. The first challenge is even being able to attend a qualifier, of which there are very few, all capped with registration, and then there's only one representative for that massive player base, so I just don't see how it's possible. And yes, this is honestly rather emotionally immature by me, and I do have a very poor mentality regarding this, but I am rather demoralized at the moment, and if I cannot attend or end up playing in a WCQ, then I'm probably going to take a break because I really have nothing to play for anymore.